You are listening to the Casting Shadows podcast. In this segment of the podcast, I'm going to quickly go over the first week of responses to the standard prompts for RPG A Day 2024. Now, as we go through this month of August for 2024, I will at times be dipping into the very interesting alternate prompts provided by the Polish site, translated into English as challenge rating. But for the prompts of this week, that won't be happening. Although, I will give you a hint that I think day 4 on the written blog is going to use that interesting random generation method. But let's not waste time. Let's get right to the prompts. My first RPG bought this year. It's a more difficult question for many people than perhaps it seems on its surface, and I've seen people out there going on quests to find precisely what it was that they bought first, and I find that to be fantastic. Brought a real smile to my face. On the written blog, I have a similar quest myself for what is the first game or first thing that I actually bought this year. So we have a wide range of answers on the written blog. On YouTube, in a short, we have one specific answer, Musketeers and Cthulhu from Nightfall Games. But here, I would like to mention Evolution by Design, a supplement for the Gaia Complex. Now, it's first for a couple of reasons. The details for that are on the written blog. But the Evolution by Design supplement further develops the Gaia Complex line, making it even more compelling than it already was. Another way that it's a first. The second prompt also introduced some ambiguity in my own life, because when we say play, are we talking about playing as a character, or can the Game Master also play? Well, I'm in the camp that believes that the Game Master is also playing. They're just playing a little differently. It's kind of an asymmetrical relationship. But that nuance between playing the game and running the game is one I find quite interesting. So, on YouTube, I joined these together into one answer. In the written blog, I've split it into two. And here, well, the game I played most recently as a character is Blade Runner. This is a game produced by Free League using their Year Zero system. And in that core book, it provides a very targeted experience for playing detectives, specifically detectives in the Blade Runner unit, dealing with crimes for, by, and against the artificial life forms known as replicants, which segues into my most often played RPG. And for 2024, that answer is easy. Usually it's kind of difficult for me to figure out what do I play most often, but this year it's been easy. We've been playing an awful lot of Call of Cthulhu. The ongoing campaign, which is appearing as actual plays on the YouTube channel, is presented from 4 different perspectives that we're calling branches, which have different mixes of characters, and sometimes these characters can cross over into other branches, but they're all set in the same city, running through the same days, but investigating or experiencing or dealing with very different things. We're playing it a lot, we're playing it often, and it has been tremendous fun. That's the 6th edition of Call of Cthulhu that we're using, and doing things like paying homage to specific works of Lovecraft and specific works of Chaosium. Moving into day 4, an RPG with great art. An RPG with great art that I received in 2024 that I was disappointed I couldn't talk about on day 1 because it didn't wind up actually being first in any of the criteria that I used, is outgunned. Now, this is by Two Little Mice, and it's a return to the idea, a return and a doubling down on the ideas presented in their tremendous game, Broken Compass. Outgunned takes all of that and ramps it up to 11, or somewhere between 11 and 13. Let's say 12. Fantastic. If you missed out on Broken Compass, rather than digging through half-price books stores and hunting through Noble Knight or wherever looking for it, I would highly recommend seeking Outgunned by Two Little Mice. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And that's just the art. The game itself, fast, furious, exciting. All right, that takes us through the first week, which is also the 4 days of Gen Con. They all tie up together. So day 1 was the first day of Gen Con, and day 4 is the last day of Gen Con. If, like me, you've never been able to go to Gen Con, well, while there is a little bit of sadness associated with that idea, at the very least, we didn't have to wait in that line. This next segment, I guess we could consider to be the main segment of the episode, although as the co-host of RPG A Day, I think that section should be considered the main section, but it's unlikely to be able to compete in terms of depth and time. So let's just let that detail go, shall we? This segment is about a campaign released last year by Triple Ace Games called The Great Campaign. Now, it's directed at their Leagues of Adventure line, which uses the Ubiquity roleplay system, which I know you've heard me talk about before. If you've listened to any of the episodes, probably there's a reference to Ubiquity at some point. Now, The Great Campaign, I had the great pleasure to be the editor for, which was a very interesting challenge. We'll get to that in a moment. The Great Campaign is not just set for Leagues of Adventure. It also has sufficient material and hooks to suggest it could be satisfyingly run with Leagues of Gothic Horror. More on that later. Okay, what is The Great Campaign? At its root, it is 4 linked scenarios, but these scenarios are very different in character. And as I mentioned, as the editor, what it fell to me to do was to bring them together in a campaign format. So these 4 related adventures were made to be more tightly tied together for this singular, under one set of covers presentation, which means that there are more non-player characters, there are more pre-generated characters, and there are things like patrons, and throughout there are rules references to make it easier for you to do whatever it is you need to do in a particular moment in the campaign, whether that is guiding you to some specific rule for Leagues of Gothic Horror, for example, or something about an opponent or a weird science device or the like. Every effort was made within the page count provided to support the Game Master in running this campaign, which I think makes it a pretty good training ground when you consider the Game Master advice, the rules supplementation, and the overall style and intention for each of the 4 scenarios. I think for a beginner to Ubiquity, this would be maybe the second or third thing I might run. My advice really would be to have your group create some characters and use them to get involved in just fun hijinks set somewhere in the world, like a weird science vehicle race or an investigation into some lost and forgotten corner of somewhere in the world, and the physical and mental and investigative challenges that arise as a result of that, and focus on bringing the notion of connecting with the leagues of adventure and newspapers and patrons and groups and singular people who can supply the funding and the connections and the information needed to travel the very mysterious world of the 1890s. Once that seems familiar in one or two short adventures, and once the characters have created names for themselves, or if the players at least have a grounding in that expectation of play, it would be time to approach the Great Campaign, either with the characters that you've been playing or by adopting the ones provided. The Great Campaign, in its 4 parts, accelerates pretty quickly at the beginning. It's a very fast-paced, highly investigative, leading to highly dangerous scenario. The results of that, if the characters survive, no joke, sets them up for the social intrigue and investigation and tremendous violence of the second scenario. Now, these could be run back to back, or they could allow for several adventures in between. But once that second scenario has been handled, the characters' lives would really be about to change, because that will set them up for being recruited, if they agree, to going on a long expedition. That long expedition can be handled in a couple of different ways. It could be turned into a pretty fast and satisfying montage using the tools provided in the scenario, or it could be presented in a very zoomed-in fashion. If you have a love of history, of travel, of terrain, of exotic locations and the challenges that arise there, and you have that good sense of timing so important to pulp heroic fiction, I think it would be pretty exciting to really dive into all the possibilities of this long overland travel to all these different locations, meeting all these colorful characters, and getting caught up in regional conflicts and political conflicts and just environmental and natural conflicts. A lot can go on, and this would lend a lot of atmosphere to this campaign if many sessions were spent getting to a point where they can begin to figure out where they're going. Because the last scenario really is a quest, a proper find something quest. Going where no one has gone before kind of feeling, meeting the people who live there. If Cain was expelled to the land of Nod, who was in Nod for Cain to talk to? That kind of thing. Going into these unexplored regions, meeting the people who live there and certainly have explored them, making connections, learning about the environment, learning how to survive there, and gleaning the clues necessary to get to their ultimate goal. All of that, I think, can be enhanced by really allowing yourself to focus on the third installment. But that certainly isn't necessary. It can be run far more quickly in as I said, a montage format. And the final scenario, like I said, a proper quest, well, it certainly has quite a payoff, which I don't want to spoil. But it can make the entire set of 4 adventures link and relink together in ways that I don't think your players will expect, which is always fun. Now, the first scenario is very organized. It presents itself very clearly, and that is presented on the page with a lot of detail. NPCs, their agendas, timelines, locations, maps for the locations, and things like that. As we go through the 4 scenarios, we shift more and more toward improvisation within the framework of logic and what has gone before. You're still provided with the NPCs that you need, the locations that you need, and the timelines, but the environment keeps expanding out, and the possibilities for what the characters might be able to do now keeps expanding, and the scenarios expand with them, which I quite like. And I hope that the people who play it do too. Now, when this campaign was originally released last year, I had some conversations with Carl Rodriguez, the geomologist of the Geomologist Presents podcast, about getting together to talk about it. But somehow in a year, neither one of us has been able to make that happen. And I don't know if we'll be able to get together to talk about this campaign in greater depth, but I hope that we can. And I'll keep you updated if that's possible. All right. The Great Campaign was written in its 4 parts by Sarah Newton for release by Triple Ace Games for Ubiquity long, long ago. And 2 parts of it appeared in separate installments, separate scenarios. The Great Campaign finally gets the entire thing in print and PDF, all linked together and supported for play. If you are new to Ubiquity or new to Leagues of Adventure, it's definitely something that I think makes itself as accessible as possible. If you're an old hand at pulp and adventure and dice pool games and things like that, I think it will be really easy. And if you're an old hand with Ubiquity, I think you'll be able to do great things with it, which is why, ultimately, it's the Great Campaign. To round out this episode, let's talk about Ubiquity a little bit. If this episode was the first time you've heard about it, you might be wondering. So, Ubiquity first appeared in a game called Hollow Earth Expedition. It's designed to help provide that heroic pulp adventure feel, and it has built-in, let's say, dials that you can adjust that can take it from an Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom feel, or you can dial that back to a Raiders of the Lost Ark feel, or you can dial that up to Last Crusade, and beyond, or less. Become less heroic than Indy when we first meet him in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's meant to support while being in the background. What do I mean by that? It's set up so that players and game masters very clearly know when they need to roll dice, how many dice they need to roll, and the way the dice pools work make figuring out how successful you were far quicker than in many other dice pool games. It's not a roll and total kind of game. It's not a roll and sort kind of game. It's simply counting how many successes you got, period. And you're done. So, with its approach to skill use, combat, injury, a decision was made at the design level to do things that make it fast and supportive of building the sense of character competence and resolving game actions very, very quickly so that you can focus on things like description, motivation, and heroism. One of the fun things about Ubiquity is that the dice it uses are any even-sided dice. Now that we're living in the world of DCC and companies like Impact Miniatures have gone to all the effort of creating lots and lots of odd-sided dice, we really need to focus that even-sided dice point. Originally, people were just saying, you could use any of your dice. And it's true. Because you're looking for even numbers. There were specialized dice produced, and most, I think, regular players of Ubiquity use D2s, something like a D6 with only half of the faces marked, or a D8 with only half of the faces marked, or what have you. But you can really, literally roll anything, and if it's 2, 4, 6, 8, and beyond, it's a success, and if it's not, it isn't. Combat relies on opposed rolls, which can be quite an immersive experience if you're into that sort of thing, with a roll to attack versus a roll to defend. And that really is the end of a combat phase, because the damage is the difference between the two rolls. It's pretty neat. The game does support a kind of metacurrency, which is called style, which is used very simply. It can be spent to increase your die pool, because this is something that plays into your strengths as a particular character, or it's something that your character cares about a lot in the moment. It can be used to resist damage, and it can be used to increase the talents that your character has as a part of their character design. And that, in a nutshell, is really it. It's one of the fastest systems that I've ever used. It's one of the easiest games that I get to teach to new people, and it's been one of my favorites since I encountered it in 2010. So I think that says something. Anyway, that's enough of a brief overview of Ubiquity, following a brief overview of the great campaign for Leagues of Adventure by Triple Ace Games, and that really should be all that we talk about in this episode. It's long enough, especially during August, which is RPG A Day month. And we are now in it with RPG A Day 2024. Hopefully, those of you who are participating are having fun and getting lots of feedback about your posts, and hopefully those of you who are posting and or reading or listening to those posts are remembering to share them with other people. Anyway, until the next time, take care. Links for all the gaming products and publishing companies mentioned in this episode will be provided in the show notes. You have been listening to the Casting Shadows podcast, available wherever it is that podcasts go to hang out and be podcasts, but specifically on Spotify and on YouTube. For more content like this, you can visit castingshadowsblog.com, or on YouTube, visit the Runeslinger YouTube channel.